Hello, my name is Skylit Lake reading Long Night in the Valley by Marileus. Chapter 1. You shouldn't be here. He stood on the top of the stair to the beach, looking down on them. With the sun rising behind them, his pupils were pinpoints, his irises shockingly bright. He wore a thin windbreaker over a t-shirt that said tracksuit, a pair of sweatpants with his signature red shoes. His expression was strangely flat and blank. He had never looked at them like that. "Deku?" said Ochako, uncertainly taking a step forward, her hand half raised, as though she could reach him despite being so far away. The commission instructor flung out an arm, stopping her. He was staring up at the boy too, his eyes blown wide, his lips pulled back with something like worry, something like fear, and something like avarice. "Whatever that is," he said. "It isn't Midoriya Izuku." Aizawa reviewed the program the commission had sent him, ignoring the gentle bumping of the bus and barely controlled chaos of the students around him. It looked fairly straightforward, all things considered. The requirement was new. Aizawa felt it was illogical to test the students like this, when they could simply have this material added to the course load. But overall, he had seen worse. So why did this bother him so much? He scanned the paperwork again. He was going to be getting the same certification as his students, had arranged to be part of the same general cohort even. But he didn't trust them on their own, at all, ever. But that shouldn't be an issue. Even when they did get split up, they'd be going to groups of 5, and there was groups of 5, with any odd number being used to fill out other groups that were undergoing testing on the same day, most of whom were adult heroes, if you recall correctly. With the addition of Aizawa, there are 21 of them. Calling on years' experience, Aizawa didn't groan. The thing was, Aizawa knew, even before arriving and having the numbers and groups assigned, who the odd one out would be. There was one student who could be so problematic without trying, or indeed having any control over the variables that went into causing the problem: Midoriya. Aizawa almost suspected that Midoriya had some secret trouble-attracting quirk, on top of the lightning-spitting, bone-breaking insanity and the randomly appearing eldritch abomination tentacle things that it would fit right in. Sadly, Midoriya's ability to find trouble didn't seem to go away when Aizawa stared at him. So he had to acknowledge that the kid was just that unlucky. If Aizawa let Midoriya go off to complete the course on his own, he would probably discover that, Pro Hero Wash was laundering money from an overseas smuggling operation disguised as an environmental cleanup charity, or somehow locate a villain despite being at a secure hero commission building, like he had during a provisional license exam, or breaking a bone again, or discovering a previously unknown aspect of his quirk again, or getting into a fight with Bakugo again. No way, not if Aizawa had anything to say about it. Izuku bounced in place excited. He was attending a professional development course given by the Hero Standard at Practice Commission. It was like a dream come true. Literally, he dreamed about this. Of course, he had dreamed that when he was 7, and he had just learned about the HSPC and what it did, and All Might had been the course teacher, which he wasn't going to be for this course, and which was a little redundant because All Might, Mr. Yagi Toshinori, 8, was already his teacher and the reason behind this course, and making everyone with any kind of hero license take it was a bit disturbing, and he had to opt out of some of the course fixtures because reasons. But regardless, "Midoriya," said Jiro, tapping on his shoulder, "they're calling for you." "Oh, thanks," said Izuku, nodding vigorously, and man, He really had to cut his hair soon. It was getting long enough to fall in his eyes when he did that, and that would be distracting in the field. Good thing it wouldn't matter for today. They weren't going to be doing anything physical after all. He walked up to the table, showed the person his clipboard, his provisional license. He could still barely believe he had it. It was so cool. And received a card with a number on it. "Pin that on your shirt," said the man, hardly looking at him. At least the man was trying to look like he was hardly looking at him. Maybe he recognized him from the sports festival and didn't want to make things awkward. But it had been a while since the sports festival. They tend to drain from common memory pretty quickly and... Oh no! He'd been holding up the line. He sketched a quick bow and ran over to where the rest of his classmates and teacher were waiting. "So," said Aizawa, looking as exhausted as ever. There was a spark of something in the man's eye, though. Vigilance? Had he noticed something amiss? Should Izuku be on alert as well? "We have consecutive numbers, so most of us should be together in the same group. Problem child." Izuku jumped to attention. "Yes, sir." It was kind of sad that he answered the name Problem Child, wasn't it? Was it sadder that he almost liked the nickname? It was nicer than what some of his other teachers had called him. It didn't have the same bite. "Trade numbers of Yorozu." Izuku blinked and looked at Yorozu. He said, "Okay?" He unpinned his card and held it out to his classmate. Yorozu took it carefully, frowning at the number. "Why are we doing this, sensei?" she asked. "Because knowing his luck, Midoriya is going to be the odd one out. And you're the only one I trust not to kill someone or get kidnapped if you're left on your own." "Okay, harsh, but fair. What about Ida?" "I know what I said." "Harsher? Wait, Aizawa already knew that? Since when? Didn't she go off that one time, though, at Camino?" Aizawa turned to stare at Mina, who held her hands up. "Forget I said anything, sensei." No, you're right. Hagyore, you take Midoriya's number." "Eh? Me?" "Yes." Sir, are you sure? I don't know if I could handle a Midoriya level calamity." Izuku felt his jaw drop a little. Was that what they were calling it now? Rude. "The calamity won't happen if he isn't there," reasoned Aizawa. Which, okay, true, but also rude. Izuku wasn't that bad, was he? Izuku took Hagiku's card. The number put him between Uraraka and Aizawa. So he'd probably be at least with one of them. On reflection, Yaro's number had put him on the other side of Aizawa's, which probably wasn't a coincidence. The rest of his class went through registration, with several of his classmates trying to trade their own numbers only for either to scold them, which was typical, really. It was almost calming. Izuku needed calm after that. Was his luck really that bad? Now he was much more nervous than before, except before he'd been excited. Now he really was not. He fiddled with the sleeve of his uniform, trying not to pick at his scars or cross the line into overt fidgeting and being distracting. He wished he brought one of his grip strength tools, at least those he would pretend were only for working out, unlike his other fidget toys. Oh gosh, was it the pro hero Rosemary, the memory hero, and Strato, the high altitude hero? He'd been so worried that he almost hadn't noticed how many amazing heroes were here. There were even some he didn't know. And then they were being called up number by number. Hagakure, true to Aizawa's prediction, was placed in a group of confused-looking strangers, including Rosemary. Izuku was almost jealous. He'd loved to learn how her quirks work. Actually, all the people in that group were heroes with mental quirks. How interesting. Izuku would also ask Hagakure if they gave her any tips. He was sure they had different insights than other people in their class, especially considering the subject matter of the course, the subject being combating mental attacks. That's why Izuku had to opt out being a subject for the course. He didn't entirely understand it, not yet, but One for All definitely had a mental aspect, and he didn't know how or if that would show up in a simulated attack, like the one they'd be demonstrating. It was better to play it safe. His quirk was already weird enough as it was. He still wasn't sure how he'd manage to talk Aizawa and his classmates out of being suspicious after Black Week came up. Most of the day was a blur. Izuku suspected that things would have not been smoothed over nearly as so smoothly if Nezu hadn't known about One for All. He also wasn't looking forward to the reaction when other users' quirks had come out, even if being able to use them was going to be really cool. Anyway, his own group had resolved itself to consist of Aizawa, Uraraka, Ida, and Todoroki. Todoroki looked revealed. That made sense, with what Todoroki had told Izuku about his history. He wouldn't want to be doing this with people he didn't know either. But Todoroki would have opted out anyway, right? Or did Endeavor not let him? Honestly, that would be par for the course for Endeavor. Todoroki said he was getting better, but Izuku had doubts. He'd like to think that people could always be saved, even from themselves. That most villains could be reformed, even if the government didn't think so. Though people like Endeavor and Kachan could see the error of their ways. But even though Kachan was better than he was before, it didn't mean that he still didn't do things that Izuku didn't like. And he couldn't imagine that Endeavor was changing faster than Kachan. Who will they have us do first, do you think? I mean, I know they're going to go through all of us, but all of this is making me so nervous. I have a lot of embarrassing memories. I mean, I'm sure everyone does, but that didn't come out right. Well, said Ida, if they let us volunteer, I shall go first. What? Said Izuku, surprised. You didn't opt out? Opt out? Asked Uraraka. That was an option? I mean, yes, said Izuku. I had to file a bunch of paperwork and get Mum, All Might, and Principal Nezel to sign off on it. But I mean, it's an option for people who know secrets that shouldn't be exposed. Like Ida, what was he thinking? I didn't know that was an option, said Ida, who had evidently now realized he was in deep, deep trouble. Izuku resolved to protect his friend's secret as best he was able, even if it meant he didn't get a good score in the training. I didn't think there was an opt-out option either, said Todoroki, frowning. He reached towards his face but tugged his hair instead of touching his scar. Okay, so am I the only one who asked? Like, it wasn't easy. I had to get a bunch of signatures and it was doable. He shrugged helplessly. I wasn't informed there was an opt-out, said Aizawa, grumpily and a little suspiciously. Izuku cringed. He did not need any of his teachers to be suspicious of him. He did not need people looking into his life, into his past, into his quirk. Maybe, if they couldn't keep Ida's and Todoroki's secret quiet, he would play off his reluctance off as pertaining to those, even if the idea made him feel incredibly guilty and unworthy of his friends. He would just have to do his best and help them. Before any more conversation could be had, a set of 6 cheap futons laid on the floor, monitoring equipment lined one of the walls. 2 commissioned personnel, a man and woman, were waiting for them. When the man saw Izuku, she frowned, pulled a phone out of her pocket. What was that about? Hi, said the man, who had a rather hooked nose and a very bright, almost glowing yellow eyes. I'm Ito Kenzo, and I'm your instructor for today. You can call me Ito-san. This is Saito Yumi. We'll be using her quirk for today's demonstration. The woman smiled brightly, putting away her phone quickly. The way my quirk works is that I can put 5 people into a shared dream state, modeled after a 6th person's mind. All 6 people lose consciousness when I use my quirk, and the perception of time in the dream state is usually altered, although by how much varies depending on the group. The dream state persists until either I release it, the people involved break free, or 8 hours pass. However, I'll be making the rounds once an hour to pull everyone out and let you move on to the next person in the group. I'll be joining in the dream state with you to help point out tactics, it said Ito, although the person the dreamscape is modeled on won't be completely aware of what's going on. The goal is to familiarize yourself with what it feels like to have your mind invaded in a safe, secure environment. Saito-san's quirk is similar enough to that of several known villains to be a good example of what to expect. Any good questions? Uraka raised her hand. Who's going first? She asked. That would be... He broke off as Saito tugged on his sleeve and showed him her phone. The man did a double take, then paled. He glanced at Izuku. You're not meant to be in this group. Yes, I am, said Izuku. This is my number. It matches. Ito glanced at Saito. Then his phone rang. Oops, he said, looking at his phone. It looks like I'm in the wrong group. You kids are supposed to have Suzuki-san. I was requested by another group. So sorry. He'll be here in a minute. Ito retreated through the back door at a high speed. Izuku saw something was going on behind the scenes. This wasn't about the suspected traitor thing again. Was it? Izuku thought after the training camp that it was pretty obvious it had to be a teacher, and it couldn't be Aizawa-sensei. He had almost been killed by the Nomu. Also, he was the best teacher Izuku had ever had. A new, much taller man walked through the door. Hello, I'm Suzuki Takami. I'm your instructor. Apologies for the mix-up. No worries, said Saito. Everyone go ahead, lie down, and get comfortable. Midoriya-san, you're first. What? Said Izuku. But I opted out. I filled in the paperwork and everything. I got a signature from Abe-san and Kondo-san, and he fumbled to pull out his paperwork. He kept copies just in case. Saito and Suzuki didn't so much look at it. This course doesn't have an opt-out, said Suzuki. Excuse me, he clearly has paperwork for an opt-out option. Maybe you were misinformed, like you were about the room. Suzuki shook his head. I don't know who talked to you, he said. They were either mistaken about what course you're referring to, or you misunderstood them. But, said Izuku. Midoriya, said Aizawa, if you want to sit this one out, it's fine. I can go with you so you won't be alone. No one's going to make you subject yourself to a quirk you aren't comfortable with. He can do that, said Suzuki, but he'll lose his provisional license. He'd have to go through recertification entirely. When's the next licensing exam? Hold up, said Aizawa. You're doing this course 2 more times, aren't you? I know I was given multiple options for getting the certification. Sure, said Saito, but it's still going to be my quirk. She wrapped a strand of her hair around her finger, stressed. Izuku's mind was racing. He couldn't lose his license. He couldn't lose his ability to help people. What would All Might think? He couldn't. It's fine, Sensei. It's fine. I'd have to do this anyway, right? Might as well get it over with, huh? He walked over to one of the futons, sat down his backpack, trying to hide his trembling hands. So, is there anything special that I have to do for your quirk to work? Nope, said Saito cheerfully. Just lie down and close your eyes. Come on, everyone, lay down. Aizawa moved slowly, which was nothing short of shocking, considering how eager he usually was to crawl into his sleeping bag. He put the bag down on one of the futons. You're sure there's no way for Midoriya to opt out? Positive. We're really sorry, said Saito. Illogical, grumbled Aizawa. He got into his sleeping bag nonetheless. You sure about this problem, child? I'm sure, Sensei. Plus ultra, right? He lay down, trying to get comfortable, but the panic rising in his vein really didn't allow for that. He could distantly feel one thrall, and all it contained pressing up against the back of his mind with something like concern. He swallowed. He didn't think about it. His classmates were hesitantly picking out their own spots. Ida looked like he wanted to say something. Uraraka's brow furrowed, her lips pursed. Todoroki was difficult to read as always. Suzuki, already lying down, staring at the ceiling. Izuku closed his eyes. "Alright," said Saito. "Here you go." Yumi left the room with Midoriya Izuku in it, feeling just slightly dazed. She paused for a moment. In the back of the hallway, she had dozens of other groups to set off, and she was running late after that little snafu. Midoriya Izuku was supposed to be with a group with Suzuki-san and 4 other specifically picked professional heroes. Heroes who would get to the bottom of why and how he had multiple quirks, who would find out who he really was, who would figure out how he was in contact with a league of villains, and why they decided to pick some random quirkless nobody, assuming that's what Midoriya Izuku really was. The initial investigations had uncovered some discrepancies in his family records. In any case, he was not supposed to be in a group with his little friends and overprotective teacher. Oh well, except for Midoriya, they were all clean. If they really were heroes, they'd do the right thing. Yumi pushed at the wall. When had she started to lean on it, and stumbled? Something bright and red caught on the periphery of her vision, and she looked down. Her nose was bleeding. She licked her lips, tasting copper. It shouldn't be bleeding. That only happened when she overused her quirk, when she tried to put too many people into one dreamscape, or tried to combine 2 dreamscapes into one. She'd been pacing herself. This shouldn't be happening. It shouldn't be bleeding like this, like she had just put more than a dozen people under. Saito Yumi promptly passed out. "Whoa," said Uraraka, looking around in delight. She was still worried about Deku. He'd looked really bad right before Saito-san activated her quirk, and she, Suzuki-san, had been acting kinda shady, but this place was beautiful, and she couldn't help but be in a little awe. She kinda expected dreamscapes to be more mushy maybe? Darker? Her dreams usually weren't very clear, except for the nightmares, but those didn't count. But Deku's dreamscape was as bright as he was. A beautiful beach, a cerulean ocean at sunrise, or was it sunset? Either way, the sun hovered above the ocean, its light gleaming off the wave. "Whoa," said Todoroki, approaching the breakers on the beach. He crouched down, looking at the sound. "It's really..." He poked the sand. "Detailed." "As expected of Midoriya," exclaimed Ida, waving his hands. "His attention to detail is unparalleled." Too bright," said Aizawa. He put on his goggles. "Excuse me," said Suzuki. "If I can have your attention, please. I apologize for the deception, however, you shouldn't be here." Chapter 2. "You shouldn't be here." Everyone turned to Midoriya, standing at the stairs to the beach, looking down at them. None of them, least of all Shoto, had ever seen the expression on his face. That was flatness that almost rivaled his own. Uraraka stepped forward. "Deku?" she asked, uncertainly. Suzuki, the commission instructor, threw his arms in front of her, blocking her path. "Whatever that is," he said, voice strange and low-pitched. "It isn't Midoriya Izuku. Saito's quirk doesn't allow for the subject to have an avatar in the dreamscape without a lot of practice. There's another quirk at work here." "You need to leave," said Midoriya, descending a single step. "Now." "It could be the result of his own quirk," said Aizawa, who nonetheless had a hand on his capture weapon. "He's had an odd reaction to mental quirks in the past. Jumping to conclusions is illogical." "We have evidence that Midoriya Izuku is working for the League of Villains," said Suzuki, backing away from the stairs slightly. "By the rules laid out in the standard." Shoto turned to Suzuki, by now quite convinced that the man had nothing particularly meaningful to say, in favor of examining Midoriya. It was Midoriya. Just a Midoriya that was annoyed, defensive, and maybe a little offended with just a touch of something else, which is a weird combination on Midoriya, especially as muted as it was. Midoriya's expressions, no matter what they were always so big. I am recruiting you to aid this investigation and determine the League of Villains' plans. If you don't leave now, I'll make you leave. Wow, for someone who is the embodiment of sunshine, he really could be threatening. Then again, sunburns are a thing, so maybe it wasn't too surprising. You're here against my will after coercing me into allowing a quirk to be used on me. I want you out. Eraserhead, I suggest you restrain this projection, whoever it belongs to. I am not going to warn you again, said Midoriya. I suggest that you listen to him. We can ask Midoriya about this when we're all awake and not in his head, like you should have done in the beginning, said Aizawa. Midoriya tilted his head slightly to one side. I agree, this is very unethical, said Ida, chopping at the air. This is basically an interrogation, and Midoriya is a minor. You need parental permission, which, before you started talking about him willingly participating in this course, said Aizawa, he explicitly withdrawn. Not to mention his mother signed those opt-out forms, so her permission is withdrawn as well. You can't be serious. I am, said Aizawa. Take us out. The whole thing is illogical. I can't, said Suzuki. Saito is the only one who can shut down her own quirk prematurely. What? There's no way for us to contact her in an emergency? That's really dangerous. That's not what Saito said either, said Midoriya flatly. The dream state persists until either I release it, the people involved break free, or 8 hours pass, implying there was another way to break free. One that you, by necessity, must know. So leave, or I'm going to start to defend myself. Suzuki took a deep breath. I am here to complete a mission given to me by the Hero Commission. Your refusal to comply with its terms set out in your licensing agreement will be noted. Midoriya brought his head up straight again and squared his shoulders. His hands clenched. He was wearing gloves, Shoto noticed. Not the gloves that went with his hero costume, but work gloves. He'd seen landscapers who worked at his family home wear something similar. Why though? Fine, said Izuku, then I'm going to kick you out. That's impossible, I know this beach very well. Abruptly, the pristine white sand was covered in towers of trash, separating Shoto from the others. Suzuki's insistence that Midoriya was a spy had already had him on edge. This put him fully into battle mode. He dropped into battle stance and carefully froze one of the trash piles in front of him, making an icy stair to the top. His first priority was to find Aizawa and his classmates and regroup. To do that, he had to get a better vantage point. He jogged up the stairs, noting absently that he was now in his hero's suit, not his school uniform. What had he been wearing before this turned into a fight? He hadn't particularly noticed. He reached the top just in time to see Midoriya bludgeon Suzuki with a piece of rusty rebar. Alright, maybe that wasn't Midoriya. Aizawa wasn't fast enough to get around the piles of trash. He would have tried to scale up, but there was no safe place for him to grab onto. The piles were simply too unstable, too untrustworthy, too poorly shaped. He arrived just in time to see Midoriya, or what looked like Midoriya, impale Suzuki with a pole. Before his mind could fully process the problem child attempting what looked like a whole lot like murder, he had him wrapped in his capture weapon. Midoriya got Goal to look confused, if only slightly. Todoroki, Aizawa barked, spotting his other student on top of one of the horribly dangerous trash mounds. First aid, stat. Yes, sir, said Todoroki, making an ice ramp glide down. Midoriya, he said, what was that? Perhaps it's illogical to ask, but he still couldn't believe his eyes. I was testing to see if he'd wake up and go away if he got knocked out, said Midoriya. He made a tiny, not quite struggling motion. This is just a dream after all. Alright, that was true, but it was still incredibly disconcerting to see Midoriya act so callously toward the life of another human being. although he wasn't sure how many times Midoriya had hit Suzuki, and certain places of impact were far less lethal. Blunt force trauma, especially to the back of the head, could be deadly. There was the sharp report of a gun, and Midoriya jerked forward, blood leaking from an invisible wound to drip down his face. Then he vanished. He turned towards that utter bastard Suzuki, eyes glazing, only to find him entirely encased in a glacier except for his head. While Aizawa had been trying to train Todoroki out of reflexively encasing human beings in ice due to frostbite, hypothermia, and other potential health issues, he was willing to let it slide just this once. "I told you," said Suzuki, teeth clattering. "This isn't your student. Even if he was, he's a traitor." "Sensei," said Todoroki, "what are we going to do?" "First," said Suzuki. He didn't get beyond that because Uraraka was abruptly launched from beyond a wall of trash, trailing a makeshift tether of salvaged bungee cord. "Found them!" exclaimed Uraraka. "I don't see Deku though." "First," said Aizawa, feeling exhausted despite technically being asleep, "we regroup." Toshinori was supposed to be teaching a third-year heroics course. He wanted to be with Izuku at the Hero Commission training, even if he was retired, with only a retiree license in his name. He was in the nurse's office, getting his brain checked by Recovery Girl because of sudden debilitating headaches weren't on the long list of symptoms he'd expect from his injuries and medication. Chio was worried he might be having a stroke, an aneurysm, or some other sudden lethal brain condition. She'd use her quirk on him at once, and the pain hadn't stopped. She said that at least it should stop an aneurysm from getting worse. Toshinori hoped it wasn't brain cancer. As far as personal abilities went, all he had to go for him right now was his brain power and a stupidly high brain tolerance. He closed his eyes against bright lights of the room. Everything seemed too bright and blurry. Sounds warped and oddly in his ears. The fabric of the bed underneath him felt gritty under his fingertips. It wasn't like he was entirely here. Oh, the joys of hallucinations. Something like urgency pushed back against his mind, whispered 8, and help, and 9. Something was going more wrong than usual. He waited for Chio to step out of the room before he snuck out. Izuku emerged from the sleep with a choked gasp, heart racing, head spinning. It took him several full minutes to get his breath under control and recognize where he was. The room for the Hero Commission course. His classmates and teacher were sleeping next to him, as well as the commission's instructor. What had his name been? Something with an S? Thinking was hard. It was like his brain was occupied with something else, and he kept having to nudge it back on track. It was like he shook his head, which pounded with the movement, distracting him further. He should... What? An odd sensation overtook, and he found himself slowly, cautiously standing up. It wasn't like Shinzo's quirk, where his body was out of his control, but more like he was almost sharing control, somehow, like he could at any point take control back. And he did, just test a theory, stopping for a moment, with his hand halfway to his backpack. But that was hard, and he really wasn't up for much in the way of decision-making, and the others were quite adamant that he had to get out now. They'd know, he'd trust them. They picked up the backpack. 8 was coming. They could trust 8. The door slammed open. Izuku froze. Several heroes in costumes and a man with a suit and a commission name tag stood in the doorway. "Get him!" 4 moved so easily from Izuku, precisely like he knew exactly how his opponents were going to act. Were they going to be? It reminded Izuku of how Sir Nightai moved. In seconds, they were in the main hallway, sprinting past crowds with the help of One for All. Izuku felt bad for leaving Aizawa and his friends, but they knew they weren't targets. Izuku was. Izuku didn't know how they knew that, but he knew that. Parking lot, streets, alleyway, rooftops. His UA uniform was too attention-grabbing. They dropped his blazer behind one of the rooftop ventilation shafts and tugged off his tie. The button down by itself was less tension-grabbing, but there was nothing they could do about his pants. Ali again. The people chasing him could track his phone. They needed to get rid of it, preferably in a way that wouldn't immediately tip their pursuers off to the fact they had gotten rid of it. Sending them the wrong way would be a good distraction, would buy them time. They slipped onto a bus and dropped Izuku's phone into a woman's purse. Hopefully she wouldn't notice the change in her weight for a while. Ch1&2 were really good at these things, not to mention one. It would probably sound weird to an outsider, but it was comforting. The experience and care of past users wrapped around him like a thick blanket, making it so that Izuku didn't mind so much about his distractions. Even though he wished he could help more. He got off the bus. They needed to find 8. "Just so you know," said Aizawa, several registers shy of conversationally, "if you've harmed my students in any way, I will do everything in my power to make your life a living hell." "Nothing here actually affects the mind of the subject," said Suzuki, rolling his eyes. "Otherwise we wouldn't use Saito's quirk." "Your information has been accurate so far," said Tenya, pushing his glasses up and frowning. Suzuki had in fact been fundamentally unhelpful. "I believe you have outright lied to us on several occasions." He glanced at his classmates for support and did a double take. Standing behind Uraka, half hidden behind a beaten-up old refrigerator, was Midoriya, a smaller, slimmer, younger Midoriya. He was wearing an all-M t-shirt, thick gloves, and an awfully large amount of rope. He was also crying silently and staring at Suzuki. You shouldn't have done that," he said. He pulled on the rope. The refrigerator came free, destabilizing the pile of trash it had been supporting. It all came down tumbling. Ochako managed to avoid most of the debris coming for her, and slapped most of the remainder, making them float with her quirk. Even so, by the time that dust settled, she was covered in scraps, the pink fabric of her hairsuit torn. Wait, hairsuit? Whatever, she was asleep. The most important thing was she find Ida, Todoroki, and Aizawa-sensei. They had been in the direct line of the collapse. She pretty sure Deku had been able to get out the way. Shouldn't have done that. The 5-point touch activation seems to affect buoyancy of objects. Possible martial arts background based on movement. Ochako spun to face not one, but 2 small Dekus. The new one, if possible even smaller than the first one, wearing a gakurin. He had notebooks spread out in his left arm, and was writing in it at lightning speed. Hands are a possible weak point, but a known one. Be careful of kicks. Gakurin Dekus delved into mumbling, and T-shirt Deku was still nodding, so he must understand. T-shirt Deku also had a length of pipe. Ochako did not like where this was going. Then again, the whole point of this exercise was to learn how to defend one's mind. She couldn't exactly fault Deku for doing just that. She dropped into a fighting stance and grinned. It was nothing short of a miracle, Aizawa decided, that they hadn't been killed yet. Then again, it was possible that Midoriya, despite his obviously distorted and altered mental state, was still holding back against them, which was annoying, because neither of the 2 small Midoriya lookalikes were particularly strong, nor did they appear to be using Midoriya's quirk, despite the fact that Aizawa, Ida, Uraka, Todoroki had no trouble using theirs. The problem was that they were terrifyingly intelligent, just a shy, ruthless, and had an incredible home field advantage in that they seemed to know the location and nature of every bit of trash on the beach, and in that they could evidently make it disappear, reappear at will. They also avoided head-on combat whenever possible, letting the terrain do the work for them. Fighting them was in fact like fighting someone with a quirk completely unlike Midoriya's, with a fighting style completely unlike Midoriya's, and that made Aizawa wonder, because all too often he caught Midoriya trying to replicate All Might's style, and if he did that when he could be doing something else more like this wasn't the time for such speculation. He pulled Todoroki away from a trap, attacking them, and then jumped away from a chain, and then jabbed and then jumped away from a chain reaction caused by whatever Uraka just threw. Unless they want to spend the next hour being beaten up by the problem child, we need to get somewhere he has less control over the environment. Off the beach, suggested Uraka, panting. He said he knew the beach well, so Aizawa nodded. That was good thinking. Where were the stairs? You need to leave. We're trying, problem child, snapped Aizawa, and miraculously that made Midoriya hesitate. Aizawa pulled Todoroki towards the stairs. The others were able to follow on their own. They made their way up, and as soon as they hit the top steps, the previously clear sky opened up and it began to pour. Aizawa was soaked through in seconds. Wonderful. However, the attacks, which had been relentless up till now, stopped. We left Suzuki. Aizawa held back a groan. Who cares? Asked Todoroki. We do, said Aizawa. We can't let him run around unsupervised in Midoriya's head. I think he might have gotten crushed, said Uraka. He was still in your ice, wasn't he? Yes, said Todoroki. Trash should stay with trash, he mumbled under his breath. We have no idea how many of our quirks will function long-term in Dream, said Aizawa, not addressing the trash comment because he honestly sort of agreed. Nor do we know what his quirk is, he sighed. We may also have to consider that he is correct and Midoriya is compromised. Predictably, there was quite a bit of protest. He may also have other information regarding the situation at hand, said Aizawa, which we need. There was a rattle among the trash heaps, and Aizawa turned to watch Suzuki drag himself out from under that mound of trash. You left me, accused Suzuki loudly. You almost let that gremlin kill me 12 times. Well, said Midoriya from behind them, where he absolutely hadn't been a minute ago, then maybe you should have left when I asked. I hope you enjoyed this video. It's an extra long one. I probably will be only updating this every 2 weeks since it's a lot of editing and a lot of recording. Don't worry, my regular Super Science uploads will be kept up. I hope you enjoyed, and see you later. Bye.